Hello. Welcome, everyone. We're so delighted that you're here for today's discussion of immigration in 2025 and beyond. I want to offer both a welcome to those of you in the room as well as the many people who are visiting us online. And what we're here to talk about today is a complex set of issues about what's been happening in the first year of the Trump administration. I'm Tara Watson. I direct the Center for Economic Security and Opportunity here at Brookings. And I've been interested in immigration for a long time. I've had plenty to think about recently. As you know, you can hardly open a newspaper or look at the headlines without seeing something about immigration, whether it's ramped up enforcement, new funding for detention centers, a $100,000 fee for an H-1B visa, a new travel ban, the end of protected status for a different group of immigrants, public charge rule, student visa restrictions. I could go on and on. It's hard to figure out as we read these headlines what the implications are, which will stand up in the court, and what the social and economic impacts might be. Meanwhile, Congress hasn't passed major reform on immigration for decades, which means a lot of the power lies in the executive branch. My colleague, Wendy Edelberg, who you'll meet later, and I, along with Stan Voyer from AEI, released a report this morning looking at our estimates of the number of people on net that came to the US in 2025. If we could have the slide. It'll pop up in a moment, I hope. Our key finding, which you can learn more about on the Brookings website, is that migration was negative in 2025 on net. And this is the first time this has happened in decades, maybe ever. We don't have recorded net migration flows annually going back that far. What you can see on this slide, if you focus on that middle blue line, is that net immigration rebounded from COVID. In 2021, it was around 1 million, which means 1 million people came relative to the number of people that left. And that was pretty typical if we compare to 2019 and before. But in the subsequent years, we had massive inflows, exceeding 3 million in 2023. Those slowed down in 24 and, of course, have sharply declined in 2025. And that sharp decline is the major reason that we now see negative net migration. In addition, we've had more outflows than usual, in part driven by enforcement activity directly, and we believe also in part driven by voluntary responses to the environment right now. There's a fair amount of uncertainty in these numbers, given slowdown in data availability that we've seen this year and the general difficulty with measuring immigration. But this is really a pretty dramatic moment where we have negative net migration, we believe. We'll talk more about this in the expert panel that will be joining us shortly. First, though, we are honored to be joined by Representative María Salazar, Republican representative for the 27th District of Florida, where she has served since 2021. We are especially grateful to have her here because she has been a leader in the cause of bipartisan immigration reform, and she's going to talk more about that today. Representative Salazar introduced, along with a fellow Congresswoman, the Bipartisan Dignity Act and reintroduced it last year. And this act includes several important components, including increased enforcement and border security, a pathway to legal status for many undocumented immigrants, as well as legal immigration reform. And this package is designed to appeal to a broad group of lawmakers and constituents. Today, the Congresswoman will be joined in a fireside chat by Brookings scholar Marcela Escobari. Marcela has had a wide-ranging career in international affairs. She was the executive director of Harvard's Center for International Development, and in 2021 through 2024 was the assistant administrator for USAID, its Bureau on Latin America and the Caribbean. She recently released a report as well called Migration Under Pressure about what lessons we can learn from the response to migration during the Biden era. I encourage you to check that out. For now, though, please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Salazar and Marcela Escobari to the stage for a fireside chat.
Thank you for that introduction. Appreciate it. All right. I see right here. Okay. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Congresswoman Salazar.
My pleasure.
I think that last time we saw each other, I was testifying in front of the Subcommittee for Western Hemisphere, which you chair.
Right.
This is a bit more comfortable.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. So,
is that bad?
So you have been, as Sarah mentioned, a longtime champion for immigration reform, and the urgency for immigration reform mounts, and the tragedy in Minneapolis, I think, has put that front and center. And through that time, you have stayed firm in arguing for a balanced approach, one that incorporates enforcement along with a legal basis for many migrants to be able to contribute to American communities. What is the receptivity of such an approach in Congress today? And can you tell us specifically about the Dignity Act and its prospects in Congress?
Thank you very much to Marcela and to the Brookings Institute for putting together this event. Such an important and intelligent place, thinking important topics. So I salute you. I congratulate you, and I really mean it from the bottom of my heart, gratitude for being able to have a platform where we can explain to the country, both parties, the independents, everybody, the Americans, how important immigration is. And as you said, even now more than ever. I wrote something called the Dignity Act, which is a piece of legislation, is the only piece of legislation in the United States Congress right now, both houses, Senate and the House of Representatives, because unfortunately, immigration is a very toxic topic. And people are very afraid, people meaning members of Congress are very concerned and afraid to talk about it because that could harm their political career. That has nothing to do with the fact that for the last 40 years, we have not been able to put together an immigration reform that we needed. Mm-hmm. The immigration system in this country is completely broken, whether it's the legal or the illegal, E-Verify, everything that has to do with immigration. So I just had the idea of writing the Dignity Act. And what does it basically say? It says, is the art of the possible, which is politics, right? Mm-hmm. At this hour in the United States Congress, under the Trump administration, we, the Republicans in charge, we can definitely pass a bill that says that if you have been here for more than 5 years, you meaning someone who came in illegally, more than 5 years, and you have not broken the law, you do not have a criminal record, and you may have American children, you may be working, you can come out of the shadows. You don't have to hide anymore. And you will pay a fine of $7,000 over the next 7 years. You will have to then give 1% of your salaries to the Treasury. We're going to then create 2 pots of money so the taxpayers will not have to pay for the dignity legislation. Very important to know that it will be zero to the taxpayers. Then you will, E-Verify will be mandatory. The border security will be codified into law, border that is secured right now. And then you're going to be able to, as the illegal, the undocumented, you will be able to go home for Christmas, go bury your mom, be able to buy a home, come back, work, pay the fine and the 1%, and then be able to buy a house, credit card and contribute within the economy and become a customer and become someone that consumes and at the same time produces. Why do I think this is important? This bill is important because of three reasons. It's national security, is the economy, and is immigration. National security. We need to know who your neighbor is because we don't want Tren de Aragua, do we? No, we don't. And we don't want the MS-13s, and we do not want illegals who are murderers. No, we do not want to do that. Those need to leave. But the ones who do not have a criminal record should be protected because they are helping our economy. So get to know your neighbor. Number two, the economy. And I'll promise I'll shut up because then, I won't let you speak. The economy. We have three sectors: construction, hospitality, and agricultural, right? And healthcare, and the butcheries, and the slaughterhouses, and the greenhouses, and everything that has to do with intense labor. Who is going to clean the toilets and who's going to go pick up the jalapeno peppers or the tomatoes in Miami? Who is going to do that? The Americans. Of course, that some natives could do that, but most Americans choose not to participate in those sectors. That's the economy. If we want to continue working and growing as the economy and the BBB, all the money that we're pouring into the economy, well, someone has to work, right? That's national security. And then at the end, immigration. Let's create modern laws in a modern time. That's basically the dignity legislation.
We'll get a chance to talk a bit about the economic impact because I think that is huge. But let's move to a topic, the topic of interior enforcement.
Okay.
Immigration policy affects South Florida disproportionately, right? With over 40% of residents in Miami-Dade born outside of the U.S., that's compared to 14% in the rest of the country. 1 in 2 identify as Latinos. And there's over 1 million unauthorized migrants that reside in Florida, of which more than 70% work, right? Given this population, how is migration enforcement playing out on the ground in South Florida? How is it affecting communities in your
my
state?
community, District 27, the heart of the city of Miami, where you have the Venezuelans and the Central Americans and the Mexicans? I have 17 different nationalities. First generation Cuban American, born in Miami. My parents are political refugees. I'm the founder of Univision, one of the most important television stations in the country. So I know exactly who I'm talking about. Not necessarily people that live in my district, but I'm talking about the whole country. The Mexicans in the Southwest, the Puerto Ricans and the Dominicans and the Jamaicans in the Northeast. We're talking about the whole nation is full of people that are going to be benefiting from this legislation. The impact. Kristi Noem, the head of Homeland Security, said that Congress needs to change the laws. ICE is following instructions. ICE is following directives. We need to change those. We need to change legislation so then ICE and then the president will be able to say, now we have a new set of laws. That's why we need to concentrate in Congress and writing new legislation so we can change not only the narrative, reality. That's why I'm doing this. But I'm going to tell you something. I am sure that President Trump, who dared to do what he did with Maduro, which was glorious, and who now is sending the message to Iran, and who did what he did in the Middle East. He is a guy that comes from construction and hospitality. He knows that we need those hands. So I think in the very near future, during this year, we will see movement. Hopefully will be the Dignity Act, but something will happen with immigration. I have no doubt that he's going to be the guy who's going to be for immigration, what Lincoln was for slavery and Reagan was for communism.
On this issue of interior enforcement, one issue that is discretionary is who we're going after. And as you know, 70% of people currently detained by ICE have no criminal records. Do you think that interior enforcement should be focused on those with criminal records?
I have said it clearly. The president said that he's going to go after the bad hombres. The bad hombres are the bad guys with papers or without papers. Want to get them out. The Tren de Aragua, the murderers, the rapists. Of course, No, we need to hone in on and dedicate the money that we allocated through the BBB on ICE to go look for those people. I do not believe or agree that it's good for anybody to go after the cleaning lady just because she has been illegal for the last 22 years. Mm-hmm. Someone gave her a job. Mm-hmm. Someone gave her a job. That's why she stayed. Why don't we have E-Verify as mandatory? You see, reality is that there are no saints in either party. The Dems and the Republicans and the Independents. Let's all come together. Let's be realistic. Let's be transparent. Let's put an end to this story and let's do the best we can, which is to give dignity. I'm not talking about citizenship. I'm not talking about a path to citizenship because that has been the biggest hurdle that this community has had for the last 25 years. Give them dignity, a dignified life in the promised land. For them to be able to go home for Christmas and come back. And I serve them. I speak their language. And if you go to Rosa or to Pedro or to Pepe and you say, hey, Pepe, look, I'm going to give you dignities. It's called the dignity status. How long you been I've been illegal for 22 years. Good. So what about if I can let you come out of the shadows? You can put your money in a bank account and have a little Visa credit card and buy a car. And I give you the dignity. And you will never be able to be, American. No problem. Yes, I want it. Wait, where do I sign? That's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. And let's go to the topic of economics. The economic literature reinforces what you've often said, that this is not a fixed pie, that migrants who work here actually expand the economy. They complement American workers and create jobs for native workers. How is the current policy affecting your district, your state that relies on these labor-intensive industries? What does it mean when people can't go to work, are too afraid to take care of the elderly?
It distorts the market also. It distorts the market because then the guy who owns the construction company knows that he can pay Pepe less than he can pay John. And that's not good either because John then feels that he has been displaced by an immigrant. No, now we're gonna create a level playing field where everybody, Pepe, Mohammed, everybody is gonna make the same amount of money, whatever the marketplace pays for that job. And then everyone can show up Monday morning with no fear, and everyone will have a driver's license. You see, it regulates everything. And according to your stats, this type of program will create trillions of dollars in economic growth. If we want to continue being the number one country in the world, we should, because we do have good principles. We should have a very strong economy. And these people that I want to bring out of the shadows will contribute to that reality. And so answering your question, it's such common sense to be able to bring some peace and tranquility to the marketplace so the marketplace can do its best.
No, makes sense.
And thank you for putting together those numbers that we have used extensively.
No, and the numbers are compelling. I think it was Florida Policy Institute estimated of the current enforcement law would cost Florida like $12 billion. How does the Dignity Act specifically either both confront that and make sure that this cost doesn't happen, given the current enforcement laws in Florida?
Well, that's why we are talking to the White House, and I'm talking to Mike Johnson, who's been very receptive. You know, the GOP, the GOP conference understands. My colleagues, my 218 colleagues right now in the United States Congress get it. It's just the politics always gets on the way because there are groups out there, not Brookings, groups out there saying, oh, you're in favor of amnesty. What does that mean? Why don't we define what amnesty means? For me, amnesty is what they have right now, that the illegals or the undocumented do not pay for schools, for roads, or for hospitals. They don't. But under the dignity, they're going to come out of the shadows. They're going to have the dignity status, and they will have to pay for their own health insurance. All right. And they no federal programs. Neither do they really have them right now because very few, if any, the overwhelming majority of the illegals do not have Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. They don't have any programs. They don't even have a bank account where they can deposit whatever they earn. So So right there, the White House. We're working with them, and we're explaining that this is good for everybody, including Florida. But I'm thinking Florida and the whole nation.
And let's move a little bit into foreign policy. As you know, Latin American countries absorbed the bulk of the Venezuelan crisis. Over 80% of the Venezuelans who were displaced ended up in a few countries, and they provided legal status to over 4.5 million migrants. Those migrants got to restart their lives, and that also meant that they didn't often continue their journey here. You have been a proponent forever of a very robust relationship with Latin America. What should be our relationship when it comes to migration? What should we be asking the region for? How should we be collaborating?
Listen, now that's a great question. If you have solid countries with good governance, and you have good governments who are allies of the United States, no one would want to leave. What Venezuela wanted to leave Venezuela? What Hondurans? I mean, who wants to leave their country? Everybody was to be able to raise their children at home. Is just the economic situation. I've introduced, now that you say that, I've introduced the Americas Act, which is another piece of legislation thanks to Senator Cassidy from Louisiana. He was the one who put it together, which basically what we're saying to Latin America is, why don't you behave well, little corruption, good governance, cleanliness, and do not steal the elections, behave well when it comes to politics. And then you will be able to join us in the USMCA and be a business partner of the United States. That's what I think that we should start fostering. Trump is thinking about that. But right now, with what happened with Venezuela, I think that we're experiencing like a new business model, a new blueprint, a groundbreaking new model of foreign policy when it comes to the Western Hemisphere, where you stabilize, where you restore, and where you transition. And it's a great message. I think it's going to be a very good message for other countries that do have democracy, but whomever is in charge is not behaving really well and it's not serving the people. You know what I mean, right? It's not serving the people. I think everyone is going to sort of clean up their game because they know that the United States is watching and wants them to behave well when it comes to good governance. So I think that we're at the beginning of a very interesting era for the Western Hemisphere. Thank God.
Let me ask a question that I know has come through many of our online viewers, which is your bill has actually gained a lot of momentum. It has 41 co-sponsors, yet things seem very difficult in Congress. What is the path toward this becoming law? What do you foresee in 2026? What's your call to action to everyone in Congress, including your colleagues, Republican colleagues?
President Trump. Trump will see that this is needed. He tweeted it a few hours ago, I think a couple of days ago. He said in that long, extensive interview that he gave to the New York Times, I'm not sure if the audience has realized that one of the quotes he gave to the journalist was that he knew that there was a need for comprehensive immigration reform. And that he was open to it, and that he was going to work with the Dems. Yes, that's exactly what we're waiting for. So I'm very optimistic. Trump is an intelligent guy. He's a business guy, regardless of what anybody thinks of what's happening at the White House. Let's look at the results. Let's look at what he can do. And one of the things he can definitely change is the course of the immigration history that we have lived for the last 40 years. I'm very optimistic. And then, and then we have this bill, and I have to give all the credit to Veronica Escobar from Texas, who has been my co-sponsor. She has been very brave within her party, within the Democratic Party. She has encountered some harsh criticism because it does not include path to citizenship. So what? It gives a new hope to those people who right now are dying of fear, of anxiety, and who cannot contribute to the American economy. So kudos and my deepest appreciation to Veronica Escobari.
For all of our sake, we're glad that somebody with your perseverance is on this case and continue to push
Hey, I
this.
was a journalist, remember? You know, there wasn't journalism.
I know we're going to open it up, but I wanted to ask one last question, or just ask you to give a message to the Latino community, which, you know, the polling numbers show that people are living in fear, and I know this is something that is personal for you and I.
It is.
And you know, they're not going to church, they're not going to work. The level of absenteeism across Latino children in the state has skyrocketed. What is your message to them? And what does dignity mean for this community?
My message to them is that I feel them. And that's exactly why I am doing this, because I know that there are millions and millions of people that I do not know, and maybe they do not know that the dignity law was written, but that I feel them. And I know that no human being should live with no criminal record, with no bad intentions, only with good intentions to have a better life for themselves and for their American children, who the circumstances push them to have to come illegally, which they should have not done, but that it is what it is, that they are contributing to one of the sectors that I mentioned, that I get them, and that there is hope, that I know that they're praying to the same God that we all pray to, and that he is listening, and that I will not stop until I see that my Republican Party has understood that this is the right thing to do, this is the Christian thing to do, this is the American thing to do, regardless of political affiliation. This is who we are, a good nation. So we got to do dignifying things for the people who live here on this territory. That's my message.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Of course.
Let's open it up to questions. Let's start with the folks in the audience. Maybe let's get a couple questions, so you get to choose what you like.
I'm David Smith of The Guardian. I'm interested, what do you think the US approach to Venezuela should be in the medium to long term, noting that some oil companies have already said it's a difficult place for them to operate? And I wonder also, what do you make of President Trump's threats to Cuba and Colombia as well?
Well, Venezuela, I think the Venezuelans are very blessed and lucky people by having a lady by the name of Maria Corina Machado. She earned it. She proved it. She was living in a tunnel for 60 months. I know it because I would talk to her often. She was the one who organized. This is the empirical evidence. It's not that I like her or I don't. It's that she organized the opposition against all odds. She was able to prove to the international community that they had won the election 70-30. Maybe more. She produced the tallies, and that's why she has the respect of the international community, and that's why she won the Nobel Peace Prize. And thank God that the White House is going to be, everything indicates that she's going to be visiting our president within the next very few days. Corina can definitely lead that country. And she was in Venezuela up until a few days ago. So I think that Trump did the right thing. It was about time for a president to do that, Republican and Democrat, in the last since Ronald Reagan. We had not seen such an action, the right step to take and take out someone who was not the legitimate president, someone who had stolen the election, that had violated all those engagements and the commitments that he made to the Biden administration under the Barbados Accords. So I have to only applaud the president and Marco Rubio, who I proudly say that he's my constituent because we all come from the same neighborhood, knows very well what we're doing. And I love this stabilize, recovery, and then transition. I think is a new blueprint, which I said previously, the new blueprint that we have created, that the Trump administration has created for vis-a-vis Latin America. Why not? Let's welcome that idea.
Go ahead. And then we'll take the both questions at the same time.
Thanks. I'm a congressional journalist that covers immigration, and I've written a couple of books about immigration law, how it evolved. And immigration law, I think almost all Americans agree that we can't have open borders, that we have to have laws saying who can come in, who can't, and how is that going to be enforced. It seems like the conversation, even as you're talking today, is all about letting people in, but I
Nope.
don't hear the enforcement side.
I will tell you right now, and I'm so sorry if I did not stress that enough.
That what?
I am very sorry if I did not stress enough the fact that we cannot have open borders, that the Trump administration has closed the border, and we have written the codification of that secure border in the Dignity Act. The first thing we need to do is to make sure that future administrations will continue enforcing a very secured border. That's the first thing. But once that is done, which is what we have done already, right? We codify that, meaning that for year after year after year, we're going to invest money and resources in order to keep the southern border closed or very tight and just make sure that whomever comes in, we know about, okay? But then once that is done, then we have to look in, which is what I'm saying. Then you look back and say, who is here? That's the Dignity Act. And this is a one-shot deal. The undocumented have a year to come out of the shadows and say, I have been here for more than 7, 10, 15. This is who I am. Here's where I live. I do not have a criminal record. I have been picking up the jalapenos. I've been cleaning the toilets, whatever you have been doing. And then you can apply for the dignity status. One shot deal. Now, future administrations need to make sure that that border is still secured, where we have the towers and the infrared cameras and the drones and the CBP, anything and everything the marketplace produces in technology in order to secure the border, we need to buy that. But then one of the things that right now that most people do not know is that if a law, the dignity or any other, does not pass, then the border is secured by executive order. It comes 28, we may not be in the White House, and then what happens? There are no laws. So we need to have a law passed by the United States Congress. Thank you.
Final question in the back.
I wrote it. Now it's up to them to pass it.
Congresswoman, I'm troubled and question the ability of us to be the fair judge of what's happening in other countries. A week ago today, we celebrated 5 years since January 6th, when our current president refused to accept the results of the election and said the election was stolen, and filed about 50 lawsuits, and no judge would support his claim. And now he's going to be able to determine whether or not somebody in another country in South America behaved properly. Isn't that kind of hypocritical?
Hey, I can thank you for your question. I do believe that the Trump administration had a very strong legal framework and a very strong legal case to take Maduro out. He was indicted in 2020. He was part of the list of transnational criminal organization members. He stole the election, or he signed an agreement. I mentioned the Barbados agreement with the Biden administration in order to respect the results of the presidential election of July of 24, and he did not. On top of that, we proved that he was one of the heads who, along with Diosdado Cabello, of the Sons cartel. So the White House had a very strong legal case. Trump did the same thing that Obama did, that Bush did, that Reagan did in Grenada. So I don't have any problems with that. And right now they have explained what they're going to do. They, like I said, they are going to take the oxygen away, which is oil. They're going to use that money in order to rebuild some of the civil society and some of the democratic institutions, and then just turn it over to the Venezuelans. This happened in Cuba between 1898 and 1902. This happened in Panama. So it's nothing new. Just because the fact is that it's Trump, it doesn't affect me. I'm just looking at the facts and how they're behaving, and so far they're airtight when it comes to the legality.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your time and your work.
Of course,
Thank you.
thanks to all of you as well, and for the opportunity. Okay. Oh, there's Eduardo.
All right, we're ready to transition. We can see, oh, there he is. Okay, good. I was going to say we can see Eduardo, but I'm not sure the audience can, but now they're able to. So I'm delighted now to transition to our panel of immigration experts. We have to my left here, David Bier. He is the Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute, which I would say is sometimes surprises people, the way they approach immigration issues. So he'll talk more about that, perhaps. Wendy Edelberg is my colleague, Senior Fellow in Economic Studies here at Brookings, former Director of the Hamilton Project. Kristie De Peña is the Director of Immigration Policy at the Niskanen Center. And Eduardo Porter, joining us from Mexico City, is an economics and business journalist who has worked for the Washington Post, New York Times, and many other publications covering this issue. So I'm very grateful for all of them joining us today. I'm going to start with a question for each of them, and then we'll get into more of a conversation. I'm going to start with David. So I gave you the very simple task of telling us what's happened with immigration in 2025. That's obviously a big topic. So could you just highlight for us a few things that you think are particularly important for the audience to know about just what has happened and how should we be thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't have a whole hour to discuss every policy change that the Trump administration has done, and even that wouldn't be sufficient to cover it. At the start of the year, I made two predictions. One was that he would reduce legal entries more than illegal entries, and that two, he would create more illegal immigrants here in the United States by terminating people's status than he would deport. And both of those predictions have turned out to be accurate. If you look at the border, it's the quietest border we've had since the 1960s. He got there by essentially banning all asylum into the United States, which was of debatable legality, and that's still being litigated in the courts, whether he's going to be able to continue to adopt that policy going forward. But at the same time that he did that, securing the border and eliminating illegal immigration, he also terminated asylum for legal entries at the border using the CBP-1 phone app. He also banned parole sponsorship programs started by the Biden administration. And in addition to those, he eliminated on day one the refugee program, which was projected to resettle about 125,000 people into the United States over the next year. And by the end of the year, he had adopted a travel ban or immigration ban that would affect 1 in 5 legal immigrants to the United States, essentially preventing them from immigrating to the United States, including spouses and minor children of U.S. citizens would be subject to this ban if they were from one of these targeted countries. And he also, in addition to all of this, eliminated the diversity visa lottery this year, which is another 55,000 green cards being eliminated through executive action. If you look in the interior, what has he done when it comes to deportations? There's about 300,000 or so deportations so far this year. You compare that to the number of people who lost their status, their legal temporary protected status, parole status, and otherwise. We're over 2 million people have had their temporary status eliminated by this administration. They were in legal lawful status at the start of this year, and now they are not. And so it is a dramatic change in policy from that standpoint. Obviously, there's been a lot of chaos in the streets, a lot of arrests taking place, a lot of things that catch the attention of the media. But that's the broad strokes of what has actually happened by the numbers. And it's been a very strict policy at the border when it comes to legal and illegal immigration, as well as in the interior of the United States when it comes to people who want to have status here and work legally.
Thank you. We'll come back and ask you some more questions about that. But first, I want to turn to Wendy. Wendy, you and I have worked on trying to understand the economic implications of these changes. As I mentioned in the intro, we are projecting that 2025 had net negative migration. So walk us through how we think about the economics of that. What does that mean for the macroeconomy?
The changes with regards to the labor market are profound because immigration is one of the primary reasons why we have labor supply growth in the United States. And so if you go from what was pretty strong immigration on net in 2024 to what we estimate for 2025 of negative net migration, you're going to have a massive swing in what's happening to labor supply in 2024 versus what's happening to labor supply in 2025. And the way to think about that for what it means for the employment numbers when you open your computer on the morning of the employment report and see what's happening with job growth from month to month. The way to think about that is that labor supply, just what's happening because of demographics and not because people are responding to business cycle effects, like the labor market looks strong or the labor market feels weak, and people responding to that, just regular old demographics, people turning 18, wanting a job, people getting out of college, wanting a job, your life changing because your kids got older and now you're going to go into the labor force, all those sorts of day in and day out demographic issues. Think of that as a speed limit on employment growth. You can drive under the speed limit, you can drive over the speed limit, but the speed limit itself is, supposed to create like a sustainable pace of traffic. So it's a little bit similar to that. And what we estimate is that limit, that break-even pace of employment growth in 2024 was quite strong. In 2025, fell to maybe somewhere in the ballpark of 30,000 a month toward the end of the year. Those are really weak numbers compared to numbers that we as Americans are used to. And then, assuming we continue on with this immigration policy, in 2026, there's a decent chance that we will see negative employment growth month in and month out, even with a low unemployment rate. So we will open our computers. I keep wanting to say open the newspapers, but there's probably nobody in this room that actually is doing that on the morning of the employment report. So we'll open our computers. We'll see that the unemployment rate is maybe still around 4.5%, which is pretty low by historical standards. And maybe monthly job growth was negative 10,000 again. And we will have to reconcile those two facts. We basically are creating a shrinking supply of labor. Now, this also has effects for the real economy. This has effects for consumer spending. This has effects for GDP. There, the numbers are going to seem more modest. We're going to be seeing numbers that we're more used to because as much as immigration is the primary reason we have labor supply growth, it's not the primary reason we have GDP growth. We have GDP growth for lots of reasons. But that said, we estimate that GDP growth was knocked down some in 2025, and it will be knocked down again in 2026. Some of the, one of the ways that you can think about that happening is just because immigrants in the United States spend money. They spend money on goods and services. That ends up as GDP growth. They're making money in their jobs. They're spending the vast majority of that money on goods and services. So you're seeing less GDP in a way that you can say they're just supplying less, but you also just sort of consistently, this is how an economy works, seeing less GDP in terms of less consumer spending. I don't want to add those two things together. They just kind of go together consistently. then above and beyond that, we think that the enforcement environment is having a chilling effect on spending among immigrants. So that's a knock-on effect. And that affected GDP growth in 2025, and it continues to affect GDP growth in 2026. And these numbers are not small. So if you think about like consumer spending, we're talking about effects of maybe between $40 billion and $60 billion in 2025 in terms of reductions in consumer spending. And then from 25 to 26, another reduction of, let's say, 10 to 40 billion. So when you hear about Walmart knocking down its revenue numbers, when you hear about McDonald's complaining about lower revenue, Albertsons, the grocery store chain, just complained about lower revenue from its stores. I think a lot of this is actually just less spending by immigrants.
Thank you. All right, we'll turn to Kristie next. I forgot to turn my page here. A lot of what we have been talking about and seeing today has to do with the executive branch. They're the ones driving a lot of the policy in this space, as it has always been the case. Could you talk about other actors that are playing an important role or could be playing an important role? Congress being an obvious one, the courts perhaps, other ways that the general populace can be shaping immigration policy.
Sure, absolutely. So I think that the reason that so many people have heard about Congresswoman Salazar and Escobar's bill is because it is very unique these days. Congress hasn't been especially active in the last couple of years. Early on in the Trump administration, Congress passed the first immigration-only bill called the Laken-Riley Act. It had bipartisan support. And basically, the Laken-Riley Act just changed how we mandated detention without bond for non-citizens who are charged and arrested. But prior to that, there really hasn't been anything passed on immigration by Congress in a long time. And in part, that's because this executive really has had exceptional control over the Republican Congress since President Trump's inauguration. The other big action that we've seen come from Congress has been, of course, the One Big Beautiful Bill that everyone is probably relatively familiar with. And in that bill, we passed about $170 billion worth of money for immigration enforcement, which is about 5 times the annual combined budgets of ICE and CBP that we have seen in the past several years. Other than that, Congress really hasn't been especially active on immigration. So much of what we have seen comes from the administration. And MPI put out a couple of great numbers this morning that I'm going to cite very quickly and put some of David's remarks into context. So Trump has signed 38 executive orders related to immigration since he began. That accounts for about 17% of the total 225 orders that he has signed so far. But I think the more important number is that MPI is estimating that the Trump administration in the first year of his second term took more than 500 actions on immigration. So that comes in the form of policy guidance or presidential proclamations. But all of that is to say that this executive has been extraordinarily active on immigration, and it's made only that much more extraordinary by the fact that Congress really hasn't been playing much of a role at all. So we expect to some extent Congress to step in and perhaps moderate this administration. There are lots of Republicans, as the Congresswoman mentioned, that are unhappy with some of the outcomes of this administration's approach to immigration, and yet we really haven't seen too much. But I do think that bills like the Dignity Act represent kind of 3 broader key points that I think are worth flagging on Congress. One is that there is recognition sort of across party lines that this current administration isn't, and our current rules aren't working the way that most Americans want them to work. So there are lots of Americans that voted for President Trump that wanted to close off the border. They wanted more control over the border. They wanted us to deport criminals in America. But what they are seeing now, especially some of the changes to legal immigration and the economic impacts therein, are not what they voted for on Trump. So there is a little bit of metering going on. I think the second piece is that even when an enactment of a bill like this is uncertain, it is good that Congress is getting involved here because their constituents want answers to some of these questions. I think the American public is probably more informed about immigration than they ever have been in the past. And so what that means is that when a lot of these folks are going back to their districts in preparation for the midterms, which feel like a long ways away, but we know are never that far away, they are going to want answers to some of these really important questions. And I think to Wendy and Tara's point, we are sort of on the precipice of a lot of kind of different potential tipping points as we see economic impacts of some of these changes, civil impacts to some of these changes, and certainly kind of social impacts as people are potentially rethinking what they supported. I think the other moderating influence potentially on this administration is, of course, the Supreme Court. And we could go through lots of the things that the Supreme Court has done to date. Most of it has been through emergency orders. Dave touched on a couple of these a little bit, but I think it's worth noting that there are a couple of really big cases that we are anticipating out of the Supreme Court that could have really remarkable moderating impacts on this administration. The first is on sort of recalibrating executive power. In the tariff case, the Supreme Court has a decision to make about the extent of President Trump's authority on tariffs. The other is the Trump versus Slaughter case, which is a separation of powers dispute about whether Congress can insulate folks from the firings that I'm sure that you are all very aware of. But I think arguably one of the most important decisions that is going to come out of this Supreme Court is going to be in response to one of President Trump's first executive orders. This is one of the ones that came out on Inauguration Day that seeks to kind of redefine who can acquire U.S. citizenship by birth. Everybody calls this the birthright citizenship case, and whether that's a violation of the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment and the INA. This is a big case. It has far-reaching impacts. We did hear early on, all the lower courts where this issue has come in front of so far have blocked the policy. But we did hear in oral arguments in May of last year on a nationwide injunction case, a lot of Supreme Court justices who were very skeptical about whether or not this EO is a violation of our Constitution. So these are very big cases, but as we all know, the courts are perhaps one of the biggest moderating influences that we have seen over many of the past administrations, and I'm very curious to see what some of these decisions look like coming out in the next couple of months.
Thank you for that. All right, and last but not least, we will turn to Eduardo. Eduardo, as Kristie mentioned, a lot of voters were concerned about what was happening at the border in the previous administration, voted for Trump probably because they wanted to see tighter borders. And we have seen those tighter borders manifest themselves, but also a lot of other action on immigration. So could you talk a little bit about how the American public is responding to what they're seeing in immigration policy, both at the border and in the interior?
For sure. Thanks. Yes, as you well said, those chaotic scenes of migrants massing at the border to request asylum during the Biden administration in 2023 were pretty critical, I think, to deliver Trump's victory in the presidential election. And the sharp drop in border encounters with migrants, which in fact started in 2024, but have dropped continuously through this year and are roughly at zero now, is clearly a Trump win. So he definitely can count that as a check mark on his side. But the problem is that the American public never bought into the other bit of the immigration package. They did not buy into mass deportations. So I think that there was a little bit of a bait and switch in the communications from Mr. Trump on this. He was offering during the presidential campaign to get rid of the bad hombres, as the Representative Salazar said earlier. This was immigrant criminals. But then he was also saying that he was going to get rid of like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them through deportation. So the way to do this is you inflate criminal rates amongst immigrants, and you forget to mention that, in fact, rates of crime amongst the foreign-born are actually lower than they are amongst native-born Americans. And you can then say, okay, we're going to go after a ton of people. And, as it turns out, that's not true. Most immigrants are not criminals. In fact, the number of criminals that are being deported, the share of criminals deported is actually quite small. And so he's had to go into, workplaces and schools and churches and send federal agents and even members of the National Guard into American cities to carry out this mass deportation policy. And I don't think voters signed on to that. I think that now that's why he is losing. He will continue to lose public support over the broad immigration strategy if these tactics continue. And here's a little polling data that I think supports this point. When Trump was just elected in February, there's a YouGov poll on ICE's approval rating, and there was a plus 16. ICE was seen by favorable versus minus unfavorable. There was a plus 16 rate of approval for ICE by November, and November was, of course, before the kind of things that we've seen in Minneapolis in the last few days. The rating of approval for ICE had gone down to minus 14. So that's a pretty large swing. And you see this in other polls too. There's a NORC poll from the University of Chicago, which finds in December approval for immigration policy at 38%, down from 49% in March. There's another poll from the Pew Research Center in October that finds the majority of Americans think Trump is doing too much in deporting immigrants. And the share has been rising amongst Democrats and Republicans. And you find, for instance, that 50% of them disapprove of Trump's immigration policies altogether versus an approval rate of only 39%. And I mean, I think that what's underlying this is that, in general, Americans are not opposed to immigration. Indeed, I think most Americans like it. What Americans were reacting to, and what worked very well for Trump was the scenes at the border of enormous chaos as Venezuelans were turning themselves in. And I wanted to share with you guys a little a chart here, and hopefully I do this well. I hope you can see it. That I think kind of makes the point that I want to make. If you look at that brown line there that spikes up in around 2023, 2024, that's
Eduardo, unfortunately we can't actually see it, so you might have to describe.
Oh, so there you go. Did I get it right now? Okay. So you'll see that brown line at the top is people who want the level of immigration decreased. And the darker line at the bottom is the number of Americans who want it increased, and the dotted line in the middle is the one who want it to remain at the present level. So if you'll see, as we saw these scenes on TV of Venezuelans, turning themselves in at the border, seeking asylum in very large numbers, you see a spike in the number of in the share of Americans who want less immigration, who want the share of immigrants to decrease. But as the border controls seem to come under control, as those numbers came down to zero, you see that drop back down to pretty much a trend line that has been pretty steady since like the mid-1990s or even the early 1990s, in where the share of Americans who want less immigration has been kind of bumpy but coming roughly down. And the share of Americans who either want it to be kept the same or want more immigration actually coming up. And so, I think that is pretty much the center. That's where the center of the American public has been for a very, very long time. There is, like, of course, a hardcore of ethno-nationalist voters in the MAGA base for which immigrants do appear as an existential threat. They fear competition for jobs, or even more broadly, they're driven by a sense of kind of demographic siege, fueled by this declining share of non-Hispanic whites in the population and the rising share of Hispanics. But more broadly, Americans are a poll after poll showing that they're pretty comfortable with immigration. In June 20, the poll of June of 2025, which we're looking at right now, said that 56% want immigration at the same level or increase. The only year since 2005 where Gallup has found a majority who want less immigration was in 2023, when we were seeing these images of chaos at the border. Last June, 79% of Americans said immigration was a good thing. That's the highest level since at least June of 2001, which is the first point that I could find Gallup numbers for. And even say non-Hispanic whites. Non-Hispanic whites are the least enthusiastic. If you break these numbers down by ethnicity, non-Hispanic whites are the least enthusiastic about immigration. But even them are not in favor of deporting all undocumented immigrants. 54% oppose deporting all undocumented immigrants in the June poll, and only 44% oppose it. So, if you just ask people, are you satisfied with immigration today? You'll find 63% will say that they are dissatisfied. But a lot of those are dissatisfied because they want more of it. Only 45% are dissatisfied because they want a decrease in immigration. So at the end of the day, the story is, I think, pretty, it's not complicated. The border created a great deal of anxiety and a sense and a backlash against immigration as a whole. Once the border was, if you want to call it solved, once the encounters at the border came down very sharply, this problem went away, and Americans kind of like snapped back to their general position on immigration, which has roughly been pretty favorable. So that's I think kind of like how this ends up working. And I think that this will ultimately hurt Trump if he continues with the policy, with the tactics that we're seeing in cities like Minneapolis.
Thank you, Eduardo. If you stop sharing your screen now, I think we'll.
Hang on. I will figure out how to do that in a second.
While you're working on that, I want to open up a question to the group in general. And even though a lot of the conversation has been around the border and around enforcement, hoping we could talk a little bit about legal immigration. This is something that's changed more than I expected this year. We've seen declines in areas of student visas, of green cards. We have one area that seems to have not gone in the same direction is the H-2A program, which is for agricultural workers. So I'd love to hear some thoughts from the group about how this administration is thinking about legal immigration and what you see coming down the pike. And I'll start with you, David.
Yeah, I mean, restricting legal immigration is a big part of the policy agenda, even if it's not part of the debate that you focus on in Congress and so on. But when you look at their agenda, like I said, they canceled the parole programs, they ended the refugee program almost entirely. They banned 1 in 5 legal immigrants from abroad from immigrating here. So, and every time there's a major event, they add a new ban. So anytime there's an Afghan does something bad, we ban Afghans. And not just Afghans, we'll add some other groups in as well. And so I fear that is setting a precedent going forward, as whenever there's there's always going to be some bad thing that happens from some country, by some deranged person, and that's going to be a justification for more and more restrictions. And the thing that we really can't even capture yet, because the data is so isn't being released on a regular basis by this administration, is how much all of these administrative actions that just gum up the works for people who are applying have actually led to fewer people getting through the process. And if you look at what's happening at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is supposed to be all about adjudicating people's applications for benefits, that is I mean, they've paused 20% of all the applicants for countries around the world, as well as if you look at the backlog, it's continuing to spiral out of control because they're just not processing these applications because of so many of the policy changes. Every week there's a new policy that comes out. So I think when I look at what's going to happen over the next 3 years, they're just going to build on that record of restriction. And the biggest restriction that's coming is the public charge rule, which under the first administration was effectively a ban on low income immigrants from immigrating. This time around, their proposed regulation on it won't even give you any kind of understanding how they're going to implement it. They just basically say, we're going to leave it up to adjudicators to figure it out, and then we'll issue some guidance about it. But the bottom line is they look at it as a way to ban low income immigrants, and we'll see even further restrictions for all countries and all types of immigrants as a result of that policy.
Thank you. Kristie, Wendy?
Sure. So, I mean, I think David's exactly right. One of the things that is both frustrating but also incredibly revealing is that this administration is following a playbook that many folks have been talking about for a couple of years. My colleague at Niskanen, sitting back there, Cecilia Esterline, wrote a piece on Project 2025, which candidate Trump very desperately tried to distance himself in during the presidential campaign. But really, it is a list of checkboxes for this administration that demonstrates the path that they are walking down to end legal immigration. The difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration, in many respects for this administration, is sort of a difference without a distinction. But the goal is to really reduce overall numbers on immigration. And so it is a playbook for exactly how I think some of these things are gonna move forward. And so far we have really seen them walk down those lists. It's really going to be a question about whether or not the American people and Congress and maybe the courts, say, oh, this is in fact, where we really want this administration to go, or we don't really like some of the impacts of these policies, and we are starting to look to Congress to moderate them.
I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up, which has to do with imagining the future. So if we all look ahead and imagine that in 2028 there's an election and there's a centrist person elected from any party and they have a centrist immigration agenda and maybe a centrist bill passes in Congress, what are the long-run ramifications of what we're seeing right now? Assume we go back to something we can all think of as being typical or normal. Is this going to be something that's sort of a blip in history, or is this likely to have long-term ramifications? And Eduardo, I'll turn to you for that as a starting point and then open it up.
I don't think you can put the toothpaste back in the tube very easily, frankly. For one, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the kind of policies that President Biden was speaking about when he first came into office, the idea of legalizing the undocumented population or having a more generous asylum policy. I suspect that, for instance, the trends on asylum policy might continue pretty much on the same trend line that Trump is leaving with us. And also because we're seeing similar things going on in Europe as well. I mean, asylum is kind of under threat everywhere right now. And so I do expect that the hard border is going to remain and that the policies are going to be very, very restrictive there. I could also imagine that, as Representative Salazar was saying, like there's some more restrictive policies, and perhaps this is a good thing on against employers employing undocumented immigrants, because that is the main draw for immigration. Now, in terms of interior enforcement, this is a particularly bloodthirsty administration, and I would hope that somebody more centrist would at least not be, send out like these heavily armed military folks into the streets to detain people willy-nilly. But I do think that the U.S., it's going to be very hard, say, even if a Democrat comes into office, to come into to return to the prior kind of like Democratic playbook on immigration.
Thanks. Wendy, I'll ask you in terms of the economics, if we were to go back to sort of more standard or typical levels of migration, what long run impacts, if any, do you think this moment will have?
I think, I mean, in terms of not being able to put the toothpaste back in the tube, I think it's not going to be credible, I don't think, in 2028 that we promise to treat our immigrants well. And I think what that means is that we have a longer term effect on how welcoming immigrants, and more importantly, for this long term effect, potential immigrants consider the United States to be. And so what we've done is we've made, a potential immigrant, wherever they are, whatever age they are, wherever, part of life they're in, they're now not just thinking about going to school in the United States or taking that job in the United States. They're thinking about, well, maybe I actually want to go to school in Canada or go to school in Europe, or actually maybe I want to take that job, in East Asia. And my guess is that sticks, and that will have longer term productivity effects. There's a deep literature that shows that immigration in the United States is one of the many drivers of productivity growth in the United States. Now, I don't want to overstate this. I think productivity growth, even with a lot less immigration and less immigration among, the fantastic entrepreneurs who are going to create, the new thriving companies, productivity growth will still be, what it's going to be for the most part. These effects are on the margin. And so it's going to be people like me and, people who are, even not yet in graduate school, who are going to tease out these effects on productivity growth. But they will most certainly be there.
Thanks. You want to add something, David?
I mean, I would just say that we passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's $170 billion. They're hiring all these new agents. They've already doubled the size of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So it's going to be a real question. What is going to happen to all these people when the funding runs out in 2029? Is there going to be, that'll be a huge debate. And so the goalposts have been shifted so dramatically, that it's going to be hard to have the same debate we had before all this happened. And so from my standpoint, when I look forward and I think about that debate, it's going to be one side saying, yeah, end it. We don't want those people anymore. We want a completely different direction to immigration policy. And the other side saying, not only do we want those people, but we want actually even more people in exchange for doing some kind of deal. And so I think that's an area where it's going to be difficult to have the same debate again once this buildup is complete. And if you look at the policies, he's shifted the goalpost when it comes to policy as well, so dramatically. Racial profiling in the streets, demographic profiling is now part of the Trump administration's immigration policy. And one side wants to ban it and the other side wants to mandate it. And so again, how are you going to bring both sides together? It's going to be very difficult to get to a bipartisan agreement when the policies keep shifting and the goalposts keep shifting. And of course, birthright citizenship is another example. Now we're debating not even immigration, but what to do with people who were born here.
Can I add one more thing, which is in a lot of our conversations and in the conversation with the Congresswoman, we've very rightly, and reasonably assumed that surely the border will stay closed. Like perhaps, that was one thing that Trump has done that actually a lot of presidents before him have wanted to do, and we will continue on with that policy. I don't have a lot of clarity, maybe you guys do, of all the factors that have gone into successfully closing the border. Clearly, there's more resources there, so there's now a higher chance of getting caught. But surely there's like still a, positive chance of getting through. It's a very large border over a very complicated, terrain. And so I wonder how much of the reduction in activity at the border is actually because, there's always two things to preventing, illegal activity. There's the chance of getting caught, and then there's the what happens to you if you do get caught. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if we are going to find ourselves in the next administration, when somebody comes in and wants to be more moderate, sort of digging into the details and realizing, oh, that second part was actually really important for how little activity there was at the border. And we can't really stomach that once we shine some light on it.
Kristie, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I'll take a different tact because I think I love the Eduardo's analogy about the toothpaste. I think the one thing that President Trump has done since 2015 is really diagnose some problems with our immigration system. And everybody has long said for decades that our system is broken. And, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But one of the things that we have seen is that, our institutions, our agencies, even some of our processes do have policies and processes that can be pretty hard to defend sometimes. And this is forcing a conversation about how we rebuild a system that is credible and that really works. Whether or not, it had to come at the price that I think we're going to pay, is a different calculus. But I think at the end of the day, if we had to look for a silver lining, it is that we are going to have an opportunity, I think, to really rethink what the future of immigration looks like in a way that has not come across, our desk since, maybe the first INA was passed.
Okay, I appreciate the note of optimism there.
I'm trying,
Wendy, to your question, I think there's a third thing, which is the timing. And so if you were choosing when to migrate to the U.S., this might not be the moment that you would choose.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Okay, on that, let's open it up for questions. Please wait for the mic and we'll take a few questions before we respond.
Thank you. Gerald Chandler here. Are any of you have an absolute numerical limit on immigration?
We'll come back to that. Let's take a few questions from the group.
Wendell Primus, Brookings Institution. Do you see Stephen Miller or President Trump endorsing the Dignity Act? I think the Dignity Act makes a lot of sense, but will Congress pass anything this year with respect to immigration?
Thank you. We have one more up here, and then we'll turn to our experts.
My name is Rav. Building on that and thinking about Representative Salazar's faith that Donald Trump will support the legislation, and thinking about his comment in the campaign about stapling a green card to every high-value degree, compared to the way things are played out in the administration, I still can't tell if the president is personally committed to the fanaticism of the agenda that's going on now, or if this is really the Miller agenda and the president is kind of going along with whoever he last spoke to on the topic, as he is wont to do. I know that's very much a politics question, not a policy question, but I'd be interested to get you guys' perspective.
Okay, great. So we had a question about who's really driving this immigration policy, whether the Dignity Act can align with whoever that is, and do any of you want to stake out an ideal number of immigrants to be coming to the U.S. each year?
When I look at the numbers, if you look back at the early 20th century, late 19th century, we routinely had a level of legal permanent immigration above 1% of the U.S. population. I think the lesson of immigration policy over the last 30 years is that we have such a static system that, it's basically stuck in cement. And it's really hard to get Congress to go and revisit it all the time. So you want to have a system that's flexible, that responds to changes in the economy, responds to changes in the needs of society. Look, our population is increased by 35% since 1990. Nothing about the 1990 Immigration Act of 1990, which set our current caps, has changed to reflect that larger population. Our economy is twice the size of what it was. Obviously, whole new industries have developed since 1990. So I would advocate that we should not have some kind of hard fixed number that is not based on any kind of economic reality. We need something that's a system that reflects the change and dynamism of our society.
Eduardo, I see your hand.
Yeah, I don't know what the ideal number of immigrants is, but I can tell you that 0 is definitely not it. The census has some population projections. The latest are from a couple of years ago, and their 0 immigration projection has the U.S. Population shrinking pretty fast. Shrinks by 6% by mid-century. It shrinks by 10% by 2060. And not only does the population shrink, we get really old. I mean, today, people over 65 are about 1/5 of the population, but in a 0 immigration scenario, the share rises to about 1/4 by mid-century and over 1/3 by the end of the century. So, so it's certainly above 0. And that is something that I think somebody should tell Stephen Miller.
I want to wait. I want to take this on and just answer it differently, which is I think there are absolutely economic implications to whatever we choose about immigration. But I think our level of immigration is largely a political choice. It's what kind of country we want to be. So Japan has very strict immigration policies, and Japan's population is shrinking. It's a going concern. It doesn't break the country. It's just a very different kind of country than the United States has been. So there are economic implications, but I don't think a technocrat can answer that question. I can answer the question of what we should do. I think it's a political question. I'm sorry?
Are you saying you're a technocrat?
I am at least, yes. Is that a trick question?
Okay, let's turn back to Stephen Miller. Who's really driving the bus, and how would a bill like the Dignity Act or another comprehensive immigration reform get across the line in this environment?
I'm happy to sort of weigh in on that. I think that it has long been the wisdom of many immigration folk in this town that if this was an issue that President Trump wants to lean in on, that he has an incredibly unique ability to get it done. He has credibility on this issue. He has a lot of control over the Republican Party. A lot of even moderate Democrats listen to and respond to what he is saying on immigration. And if this was something that he said he wanted to sort of fix, even in small steps, even if we're not talking about comprehensive immigration reform, I think that he is probably pretty uniquely situated to do it. I think that is the right calculation by Congresswoman Salazar. Whether or not there are other people in the White House or, there are other folks who are going to kind of stand up and get in the way of that, I think is a question for how hard the president wants to lean in on it. I mean, he is the one that is in charge. He is listening not only to Stephen Miller, but to his economic advisors, to his, political leaders who are telling him about what is going to happen in the wake of some of these midterms. And I think all of those are going to be really persuasive things for this president to listen to. We haven't done anything in a long time, though. So it's going to take some real leadership amongst people in Congress who historically have been very afraid to touch this issue because it is incredibly toxic. We have seen many, many really good legislators sort of fall to immigration in the past. So it's going to take a lot of bravery and a lot of drive. But I think that is, again, sort of why maybe this president is uniquely situated to move this through.
Thanks. All right. In our last moment here, I'm going to ask each of you to just spend 30 seconds telling us what you're focused on most for 2026, what you think is the thing that we should all be watching. David, I'll start with you.
I think when it comes to enforcement policy in the United States, the demographic profiling that we see in the streets is by far the most important policy change when it comes to interior enforcement. The arrest numbers are not something of order of magnitude different from what we saw under Biden or the first term, but the number of people who are having these types of interrogations with immigration enforcement agents on the streets is an order of magnitude greater. And if you look from just January until the end of the year, the number of people who were arrested on the streets, didn't have a criminal record, no final order of removal, no reason for an immigration agent to touch them, is 10 times greater than it was at the beginning of the year. And it's also 10 times greater than it was in 2017 under the first Trump administration. This is totally unprecedented what we're seeing. And as they add an additional 12,000 agents, more than doubling the number of agents in the field, this is going to affect every community, every city, really almost everyone in our country is going to come in contact with this one way or the other. And so that's the debate that I see coming down over the next 3 years. Is this the country that we want to have? Is really the question here.
Wendy.
I will be very focused on the labor market. And the report that we just put out focused on aggregate statistics and what we think will happen in aggregate to the economy and the labor market. And hopefully you and I, with Stan, who's hopefully watching, will have time to dig into issues at a more sectoral level, geographic level, to see what's happening, not at an aggregate level, but community by community, sector by sector.
Thanks.
I'll try to differentiate a little bit, although I think those are very important things to watch. I think it's very important to listen to what this administration is saying about immigration. This has gone beyond, policy or economics or even politics. The way this administration talks about immigration is much, much broader. And I think that means its implications are much, much broader. So, if we want to really listen to, this administration and trying to categorize what it means to be an American, what we want this country to look like, how we talk about this country as it relates to our sovereignty and our national security and even our domestic security, is really important to sort of pay attention to the way the administration talks about new people coming to America and sort of how they're using some of these talking points as it relates to the rest of the world and how we are defining Americans. I think it is much more explicit than we've seen in the past, and it can tell us a lot about the root of what the purpose of a lot of these policies are, even if we don't see some of the impacts of it immediately.
Eduardo, final word.
Well, you've covered the terrain fairly well, but I would add that I am very interested in paying attention to how the politics of immigration change and shift as what I expect the unpopularity of the measures that are being now put in place across, especially American cities, but, clearly it's seen on TV screens across the country as the unpopularity of this sinks in. I expect that this is going to cost Republicans in the midterms. The reaction, particularly of Latinos, who were very important for Trump's victory in 2024, they are very much against what's going on by margins of 70% to 20%. And so I expect this to have some kind of political repercussions. And I'm assuming that given that, politicians are forward-looking, there will be some, preemptive, perhaps conversations or actions or changes in policy that might, shift the direction of what we're seeing right now on immigration. But I'm not entirely certain about that, but it's what I would kind of expect. I'm very interested in seeing how that plays out.
All right. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, as well as Marcela and the Congresswoman for having our fireside chat. And we hope to see you all again at Brookings soon.